All right, so now we're going to get into our speakers and our topic. Um, California, as we all know, is leading the way or attempting to lead the way in zero emissions requirements and climate change. They have put a number of requirements on public transportation agencies related to 2028 goals and then 2040 goals to be zero emissions. In multiple conversations with our three biggest partners, although we are friends with people at WestCat and TriDelta and dozens of others around the Bay Area here, um, they are struggling to hit those goals. And so today we are going to sort of hear from them and their perspective on why these goals are hard, what the difficulties are in the marketplace, what is changing. But we also want to leave today with possibly writing a position paper from East Bay leadership with a series of recommendations to state legislators and ARB, among other agencies, with what needs to change because the factors on the ground are changing. So I'm going to pass it to Bill to start. Bill is going to help frame this conversation about what is happening, what are those mandates they're facing, and kind of put a big picture here.
Well, great, Jared, and good morning. Thank you for the invite and giving us a venue to sort of speak our mind, if you will. Um, it's a complicated beast of an issue, really. And I think one thing that I'd like to say as a disclaimer right up front, I think everybody, at least from an operator perspective in this room, we are really pro making a change to the climate. We want to reduce GHGs. So that is of paramount importance to all of us. And so I think it's important to make that statement up front because much of what you'll hear from us is probably going to be critical of where the state has and the approach that the state has taken so far. So the innovative clean transit rule, which is the regulation that public transit operators are subject to, is a regulation that requires a conversion to zero emission vehicle fleets. That's essentially what it is. It's an important thing for me to state it that way because it is not a GHG reduction regulation. And I think that nuance is really important because the regulation requires us to make this conversion regardless of what that impact is to the overall climate. The other thing that I think is important, and I just want to do a number of maybe broad picture, 30,000 foot up views. And then I think as we move forward, Jared, you'll lead us more into the nuanced detail. Um, Forgive me, my voice is going and it's a most unfortunate time. Of course, this is the way it works. So within the Bay Area as a whole, the operators have gotten together. We've spent quite a bit of time doing a tremendous amount of analysis of what this regulation is going to mean. It will cost the transit operators within the 9 county Bay Area $8 to $10 billion to complete this conversion. So this conversion must be completed by 2040, and it's the cost of the purchase of the vehicles and also the infrastructure improvements that are required to make those vehicles operational. When you think about that from the perspective and maybe with the background of public transit currently, or forgive me, back in 2004, the analysis was public transit was responsible for 0.7% of the total mobile source emissions in the 9 county Bay Area. So fast forward to today, we're using much cleaner engines. Most of us don't burn diesel. County Connection, for example, we burn what's called renewable diesel. It is not a petroleum product. Its emissions profile is profoundly lower than what diesel is. So I would contend that our share of those mobile source emissions is reduced from that 0.7%. Now, to put it in perspective, we're going to spend $8 to $10 billion to convert to zero emission vehicles, to reduce that percentage that of our our contribution to the emissions in the Bay Area from 0.7% to a smaller number, not to zero, because remember, even the generation of electricity uses carbon fuels in some form or fashion. And we all know that hydrogen's not 100% green either. So we will reduce it from 0.7% to another number. We don't know what that number is. So does this make sense? I think those of us in this room, from the operator perspective, would say it does not make sense. Public transit in its base foundational form is a solution, not something that we are required to do something additional to reduce those GHG gases. Remember, anytime anybody moves from a car to a bus, we're reducing GHG right there. We would contend that we would be doing a much better job if we could spend that $8 to $10 billion in more service. If we could do that, we could certainly attack mode share and move many more people from a car to the bus. So I think that's just sort of setting up that kind of broad perspective. And Jared, I don't know if you want me to turn it back over to you to maybe start probing deeper.
Yeah, well, I'm going to have Sal go next representing AC Transit because AC Transit is a leader in the conversion to lower emissions fleets, but they're still running into difficulties. And so part of this is too, is I think Bill did a good job saying, hey, they're all in favor of, reducing emissions, but how can they do it and continue to improve service as well? So, Sal, do you want to talk maybe a little bit about what your agency has done, but then what are the difficulties as you continue to move forward?
Yeah, absolutely. And Bill really painted the broader picture. We actually started pioneering zero emission bus technology and really studying it in 1999. And in early 2000, it was 2002 when we operated our first fuel cell bus pilot. And back then, when CARB implemented the fleet rule, uh, any transit agency that had 200 or more buses had to either seek an alternative fuel path, which back then was compressed natural gas or liquid natural gas, or they wanted to remain operating diesel vehicles, they had to test this fuel cell technology from the NASA and aerospace industry that would generate power to charge a battery that would then run the electric drive powertrain like a regular battery bus would have. Only because back then the battery technology wasn't robust enough to move a big, heavy 40-foot bus. So AC Transit and a few of the regional transit agencies elected to pilot a fuel cell bus and stay on operating diesel. And so we bought the first three fuel cell buses and ran those for a couple of years, learned a lot from them. And then initially it was four transit agencies running three buses. Then we decided to do the advanced demonstration funded by federal government and the state. And we ended up electing AC Transit Volunteer to be the owner and operator of the fueling station and the 12 fuel cell buses, next generation fuel cell buses. So that was our second generation in 2006 when we started operating those. And we ran those to about maybe 10 to almost 11 years. And the Department of Energy actually had some milestones to prove the viability and the commercial viability of that technology. And we surpassed a lot of those milestones. I'll give you an example. The fuel cell engineers initially guaranteed the operation of the fuel cell for 4,000 hours of operation without failure. We were able to run one for over 35,000 hours. And there was just a lot of things that we proved the robust technology. And in 2017, we actually were awarded two grants, one from the state government, excuse me, one from the state and one from the federal government to buy fuel cell buses from the state and then battery buses from the federal government, both from the same bus manufacturer. And we thought, oh, this is a great opportunity where we can put both technologies side by side, operating on the same routes in the same transit agency, built by the same manufacturer. And then we actually added diesel hybrid, and other technologies that we had. And that's where the 5x5 study was born, where we actually use real apples to apples comparison to put a comprehensive report out for the industry to learn from it. Because prior to that, there were pilots from different states, different counties, different regions operating in different environments and using sample data. So we've grown a lot. We learned tremendously. We also learned how to scale up the charging infrastructure and the fueling infrastructure with every generation of bus that we've deployed. So currently we're operating 58 zero emission buses, 30 are hydrogen and 28 are battery electric. And the board has approved purchase of 66 more that we expect to receive by the end of next year, which will put us at 20% of our fleet will be zero emission by the end of next year.
Great. And Christy, do you want to talk about your perspective?
Yeah.
I know
Yeah,
you
sure.
I should say.
Yeah, I have stuff to say, of course, but I represent a smaller agency. We are probably a sixth the size of AC Transit or less, about half the size of County Connection, and we have zero emissions buses presently. I'll just kind of talk to you about where we're at. We adopted our Innovative Clean Transit Transition Plan in 2022, and the plan called for never another tailpipe. So in other words, only zero emissions buses all the time, which is a great idea, but very difficult to operationalize. And I think at the time in 2022 and the years up to that, the stars were really aligning for LAVTA for hydrogen. So our board's plan is a 100% hydrogen fuel cell fleet. And I think at that time, there was a lot of optimism about fuel cell technology, that the cost of hydrogen, both the hydrogen gas and the rolling stock buses would be going down. We have Gillig in our backyard, and Gillig was expressing an interest in getting into that technology. And ValleyLink, I know Uche mentioned ValleyLink earlier today. ValleyLink was originally going to be operating with hydrogen, and they were going to produce hydrogen at a plant in Tracy, and we were going to be able to purchase hydrogen at cost, and that is all great with very little GHGs to get it from Tracy to Livermore. And things have changed since 2022. I will share that my board just yesterday authorized the purchase of 8 diesel hybrid buses from Gillig. So we are making a diesel hybrid bus purchase. And the 12 fuel cell buses that we were going to buy this year now will take the shape of 8 diesel hybrids. And maybe we will buy 4 fuel cell buses next year. That's what's programmed in our budget. However, we do need to update our ICT plan. We do need to revisit the assumptions about hydrogen technology. And so we are hitting the pause button, albeit temporarily, and just really reevaluating our assumptions. And I would expect a more conservative approach to the ICT plan instead of never another tailpipe. Our next purchase will be in fiscal 28. And I believe that is still before the 100% must buy zero emissions buses forever and ever hits. So yeah, we are definitely rethinking things. I think the challenge for us is we have a fully funded hydrogen fueling station that we have pieced together through a very successful grant application with 2 CTA and County Connection and a federal earmark. And I really do not want to build a 30,000 gallon hydrogen fueling station, given everything, given financial uncertainty, given the cost of the rolling stock, given the cost of the fuel. So I'll stop there and I'll turn it right back over to you, Jared.
So let's talk, and maybe Sal, you can go first this time, about rising costs, because that was something we had talked about earlier. It's really impacting this. These regulations came, I think you said, in 2004. There was predictions that if every bus agency would buy these, then the cost would be lower. But we have tariffs, we have inflation, and they weren't getting lower.
Yes. So when the ICT ruling was being developed, we were all involved. We meaning the California Transit Association and a lot of the transit operators that were going to be impacted by that. And we looked at a lot of data, and the data that was available at the time was from pilot buses and pilot infrastructure. And the promise was as more demand was out there, the economies of scales will start to reduce the price of a battery bus or a fuel cell bus at that time. And this is in 2016 or actually 15 all the way to 2018. It was like 3 year time frame to develop the ruling. A battery electric bus was $850,000. A fuel cell bus was a little over $1 million, and maybe 1.1 was the one that we had bought, and that was a pilot bus, so it wasn't really a America built bus. And the idea was that eventually the battery bus would get closer to maybe 700,000. Back then, a diesel bus was 550 to $600,000. And the fuel cell bus will also start to come down to maybe in the 800,000 range. We were paying for fuel in 2014, 2016, $6 per kilogram on hydrogen. And so then we started to buy more of these buses. Well, in today's market, I just received a quote for a battery bus at $1.4 million and a fuel cell bus at $1.7 million. And the kilogram is costing me $10.58 per kilogram. So to Christy's point, it's just gotten extraordinarily expensive. And this is from the past 2 years, the cost of a zero emission bus has gone up anywhere from 30 to 40%. And it's escalating. And that's a pretty rapid escalation. A lot of it has to do with the producer price index formula that the bus manufacturers utilize to add on costs year over year. And I think a lot of it started with the pandemic impacts on the global markets. That really started all the cost escalation, not only for a ZEB transition, but just running operations in general. All the transit agencies are struggling with that. And then, there's not a lot of suppliers, and suppliers that are left are demanding more for their product. And now the tariffs or the threat of tariffs are creating another unknown, which adds anywhere from 17% or higher, depending on what product goes into the vehicle. Bus manufacturers are just issuing letters of notice that to expect a price increase anywhere from 17 to 20% for the next order. But they don't really know how high it's going to be. So it's very unpredictable. It's very concerning because we have to pre-program and plan our capital procurements 5-10 years out, sometimes even further than that. And our transition plan goes all the way out to 2040. So we already had mapped out the bus procurement, the infrastructure, the funding that we needed, all in sequence so that it all lines up. All that is out the door now. We can't afford it.
Yeah, Ed, do you have a quick question? We might be answering.
This is very sobering. So is the stake on to delay the deadline? I mean, it's not economical.
Right. That's going to be one question we're going to ask in our recommendations here is what's a new timeline that we should be asking for? Christy, along those lines, we're talking about how the buses have gone up in price, but there have been a lot of federal grants, both that have paid for zero emissions infrastructure under the Biden. There was the hydrogen hubs coming to California, ITC credits, and just grants for buses from the feds. But the feds have been changing a lot in recent months. How is that impacting you?
Yeah. And I just wanted, before I go into that, I just want to mention, and Bill knows this, and Tal knows this, 6 or 7 years ago, there were how many US bus manufacturers? 8 or 9, and now there are 2. And only both of them produce battery electric, only one produces fuel cell. So I just want to leave that little fact with you. California, transit agencies have been applying for federal grants to fund the infrastructure and the rolling stock for zero emissions transition. LABTA has not been successful at our grant writing. We still try every year. We go after LONO or bus and bus facilities grants. I know our friends AC Transit have been much more successful than we have. But given the current administration, and I had just a call with my federal lobbyist 2 hours ago, it is likely that these discretionary grants may go away, especially the ones that are focused on the no emissions. And so, we also have some California grants, the TIRCP in particular, but it's oversubscribed, and we're all just kind of competing for very limited dollars. And so I just think it's going to get worse. I think the discretionary dollars will be changing. We were supposed to hear about the 2025 Low-No Awards before the government shut down. They were due, I think, September 27th. We haven't heard anything. And so I just think the outlook for funding to support this well-intended mandate, is going to be a challenge. The funding is drying up potentially.
Okay, so Bill, I'll come to you. Prices are going up. Grants from the feds and the states aren't meeting it. We also hear this fiscal cliff issue that we're all here very familiar with, right? This is a very sophisticated group. How does that continue to play into buying these buses and just prioritizing service?
It's a really good question, and there really is a nexus between the two, and I think that's very important. So we all know that we are in this fiscal cliff with a number of the larger agencies, AC Transit being one of them, on this call. Having said that, the smaller operators like to characterize it for us as a fiscal hill. Maybe it's not a cliff, but I can tell you County Connection is already spending into our reserves in order to maintain our existing services. So when you have that kind of an economic situation going on, and that's really close to $1 billion Bay Area-wide deficit that we are grappling with just to maintain existing services. And I stated earlier on this call, it's going to cost us $8 to $10 billion to do the conversion. So what does that really mean rationally, especially when we know that the state and the federal funds are drying up? That means that we're going to contract transportation services all across the Bay Area. And I think that will have a profoundly negative impact on the economy to the Bay Area as a whole. I like to say this, and I am biased, but my opinion, I think I feel strongly about. Public transit is the unsung economic hero. It's quiet, it's silent, it's behind the scenes, but we're the ones that are bringing the essential workers to the grocery stores, the medical labs, students to school, restaurant workers. And without that layer of public transit, then that economic component goes away. The other thing that happens is we literally lock up the Bay Area as a whole. Because as we don't provide the services, those folks then flee to the car. We're already congested. And so if it takes an hour to get to San Francisco from Antioch today, it's going to be an hour and a half tomorrow as we begin that spiral in reducing our services. So I do think we do need to step back and take a really hard look. And Ed made the comment, well, what do we do? Do we roll it back? Well, interestingly, 2 weeks ago, CARB did agree to roll back the advanced clean fleet rule for cities. And the cities made a very, very strong case that they can't meet it. And it's going to have a negative impact on their ability to provide the services to their constituents without a rollback. So at least on that side of the house, there's a recognition, and it is a completely different regulation, to be clear, than the one layered on public transit. But I think we need to take a hard look at our policies at the state level. What is it we're really trying to accomplish? And the rule in its current form, in its current milestones as layered upon transit operators, is not something we can meet. And as we attempt to meet it, we're going to reduce services to our communities. Does that
Yeah.
answer your question, Jared?
Yeah,
If
Christy, go
can
ahead.
I tack onto that? So yeah, we are not the polluters. Respectfully, this is a well-intended mandate. I want clean air. I want my daughter to live in a healthy planet. But to Bill's point, when he started this conversation, we are truly not the polluters. We affect pollution when people get out of their cars and they ride our service. And we do that with frequency. And that is what I believe. And we need more operating dollars, not to spend our precious reserves to convert our fleets. And I would just question, do people really care if your bus is zero emissions or low emissions? I would venture most people do not. They just want to get from A to B. So I will get off my soapbox, but I just really believe in my heart that we affect pollution with ridership. We do that with frequency, and we need more operating dollars to be successful.
Chris Kelly, I saw you put your hand up, and I was actually going to call on you for your take on this as a board member and an elected.
Thank you, thank you. And Westcat certainly has the same problems that County Connection LAVTA does, and also we share the pain with AC Transit as well. So, has anybody contacted any of the state electeds? Lori Wilson's is head of the Transportation Board. Anybody else? Because I think somebody really needs to go and talk to them. Um, in order to find some kind of solution. I know that Westcat, for example, has been planning to transition to hydrogen zero emission, but the cost of hydrogen goes up and down and the availability is not there. And I can tell you also that SF Bay Ferry, otherwise known as WITA, was having issues when it had one hydrogen powered ferry. So they're, trying to do electric now. They've got a lot of money for that. But is anybody approaching the electeds? That's what I want to know. State electeds.
I can comment on that. And Bill, I think you were silent if you were speaking.
I was.
Why don't you go ahead? I'll wait. Go
Sal,
ahead.
I appreciate it. Okay. And I think really, Chris, thank you for that question. It's a great question. And everybody in this room from the operator side has, and it might be instructive to give you a sense of what we do. There is a small operator, East Bay Coalition, which comprises Christy, myself, Rashidi at TriDelta, and Rob at Westcat. And for a number of years now, we do make the rounds in Sacramento, and we walk our electeds through the actual impacts of the ICT and our inability to really meet those regulations. And so we're doing that. But I think what is good about a conversation like this, alone, we're not going to affect change. There needs to be a broader base level of education occurring and a broad base of feedback back to our electeds at the state level in educating them what it means. So it can't just be a county connection or a TriDelta or even an AC Transit. We need partners, and we need partners that will highlight what the negative impact to our communities are going to be if we don't make a change to it. And Sal, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you for that, Bill. And Chris, what I want to add is there's actually an effort from the Governor's Office of Business Development, GoBiz, that is bringing together the Air Resources Board, the Energy Commission, the CPUC, a lot of the state departments and transit agencies. I happen to be on that task force, and the California Transit Association representatives. There's several of us that are meeting, and we're actually identifying some of these challenges. And those meetings are intended to bring out what are the challenges to delivering the ICT ruling, and then what are some proposed solutions. Although it is very clear, because this is only a 2-year task force, there's not going to be any regulation change. Not from there. There's just going to be recommendations, but we are bringing to light how the state departments are not aligned. The Air Resources Board has an unfunded mandate for us to transition. The Energy Commission and even the CPUC that regulates the electricity or the power, we didn't get our bill that we wanted to prioritize public transit during emergencies like first responders to make sure that we get power so we can energize our battery buses and run service. Well, that didn't go through. And then just recently, the tax extension of the sales tax benefit is ending on December 31st. That's another costs that we're going to have to incur. So there's decisions being made at the policy level and in Sacramento that do not support the ruling itself. And we're the ones that are impacted because we still have to deliver on the ruling. So there is this tug of war going on right now, and we're caught in the middle. And our priority and our focus has to be on transporting members of the public and communities to what Bill mentioned to keep the economic engines moving. I'll share a couple more statistics. We actually presented a report to our board in 2 years, from May of 2023 to May of 2025. We presented a economic impact report, and it shows in the 9-county region, AC Transit invested over $106 million just on the things we buy, the cost to operate. In Contra Costa County, it was $18 million in 2 years. So not only do we take people to jobs and create economic, we actually invest. We hire companies that hire people, that put people to work. So there is a bigger impact if we're not able to deliver our service.
Yeah, and I think you said that sales tax exemption creates a 4% just number that goes up on every bus going forward starting January, and some of these other policy gaps that you mentioned. Let's, and feel free for everybody else, feel free to put up your hand or chime in with a question. I want to move, just with 21 minutes left, to what are some recommendations that we could start maybe making? What are some things, maybe continuing this sales tax exemption, looking at how getting 50 people on a bus in a day reduces emissions and getting you credit for that. What are some other things from the three of you? I don't know who wants to go first, that can really um, help achieve these goals.
I can start. First of all, yes to those two, definitely, immediately, like yesterday, because we are buying 66 zero emission buses next year, and I'm going to pay 10.25% taxes on those versus 6%. That's a huge cost. That alone would have saved us a lot of money that can help us with other expenses to operate and maintain. I think some other areas where we can be creative is dedicate funding. So HVIP is out there, but HVIP sometimes is very complicated to secure. And then maybe there's a way to craft that program so if anyone that is ready to buy and issue awards to procure zero emission buses can get enough money to at least offset the cost. Because right now it's fixed. It's fixed at, I think it's 350,000 for a fuel cell bus and 180,000 or 85,000 for a battery bus. That doesn't cover it anymore. But if I am ready to buy 66 zero emission buses next year, and I submit that to the Air Resources Board and they can dedicate that money, we keep it going. And then if Bill and Christy is ready, once Christy is convinced she can build her station, then I think if the money's there to support not only the procurement, but the ongoing operations of the equipment, of the zero emission buses, it gives us a little more confidence that we can continue to move it forward. Otherwise, we have to freeze and pivot. Same thing with the TIRCIP. Sometimes the AC Transit has never been successful by getting a TIRCIP grant because the way we have to meet the criteria, it just doesn't match the way we operate it, specifically because it's bus. And so it's very complicated to do that. Agencies that have rail are a lot more successful because they have another way of meeting that criteria. So maybe if there's other ways to streamline the ability to access funding would help.
You know, if I could add on to that, Sal is making a really interesting point. So we have a mandate to convert to zero emission vehicles. It's also clear that there's a significant net increase in cost in doing that, but there's no funding stream dedicated to that. And the only funding streams that there are all competitive. So what that ends up doing is only the agencies that happen to have really great grant writers, they're the ones that get the money. And then when you really think about it and you start boiling this down, this is a statewide mandate. You know, if you're a general manager trying to manage a zero emission conversion, and I don't know, you're in the Mojave Desert, you're probably not going to have the same skill set that Sal has at his fingertips. And so it's not a fair playing field for these transit agencies in attempting to make that conversion. So I do think from a policy perspective, if we have this mandate, we should then be asking for some form of formula dollars that gets injected into the system that gives us the ability to do that in a consistent way across the state. So I do think that's an important policy thing that we could be seeking and thinking about. I do think the existing ICT is too aggressive, and the vehicles that are available to us have not evolved enough to be completely operationally viable. Another example of that, we didn't touch on this, but it takes 1.25 electric buses to do the same work as a diesel bus. So as we all scale up, that means our fleets have to grow as well. If our fleets grow to do that same amount of work, that means
Bill, can you explain that?
yes. So there is not a battery electric bus that can go the full distance that a diesel bus goes. So, for example, the way we build our schedules, a bus will leave at 4 in the morning. It may not return till 11:30 at night. But if it's an electric fleet, it's going to have to return at 6 at night. And then we have to dispatch another bus to cover the work that diesel bus used to be able to do. That means I have to have more buses and more personnel to do the exact same amount of work. So that's another hidden component of the operational cost that's not readily seen by the world. So I do think that we should push for a rollback to the ICT. I do think that, we've seen lots of improvements, and I do think that the electric buses are going to get better and the fuel cell buses are going to get better, but they're not there yet. And they're not there in a way that makes it one for one in an operational world. So the rollback of the ICT, I think, is something that there's value in. Not get rid of it, a rollback. Give us some time, give the manufacturers some time to improve the vehicles as we continue to figure out how to do this. And there was another policy thought I had. The other component is on the CPUC side. So Sal touched on this as well. We were seeking what was called first responder level of power guarantee, I guess you would say, to electricity. And this is a really important thing. And a lot of people don't understand necessarily that public transit is one of the components of the safety net for our communities. So in the event that there's a natural disaster, an earthquake, God forbid, it's public transit that comes in and evacuates people. Sometimes it's used to deliver food, deliver vaccinations. There's a whole host of ways in which public transit is used to mitigate a disaster. During the Katrina earthquake, there was no power, and it was immediately followed by a heat wave. They were worried that they were going to lose thousands of seniors because they were stuck in nursing homes with no air conditioning and no way to cool them down. They used the public transit fleet. For 2 weeks, they just cycled from senior home to senior home to senior home, and they would offload them out of the homes onto the buses, cool them down, and then back into the homes. That's an emergency mitigation. If we do not have that protection and guarantee of the power, we are not going to be able to be our community safety net anymore. And that's why what Sal was saying is so profoundly important. So that's another policy issue that I think we need to pursue.
Okay, Christy, can you build upon what your two counterparts said? And I would also then ask maybe at the end of that for you to touch on the advantage of increased ridership on public transit as well.
Sure. I really have no more words. My colleague said it all. I wrote down the state needs to pony up the money for infrastructure or otherwise change the ruling. So I am less about what does it take for us to achieve this. And admittedly, it's easy for me to say that because we haven't yet invested in the zero emissions technology. So I think a little delay is okay. But there's an elephant in the room. We're just not talking about it. And we've got a state task force that Sal's on. There was another one that Rashidi was on. I'm on a ZEV task force for MTC. And we're going round and round and round talking about, we're not being direct. And so again, I keep getting on my soapbox here. I apologize for that. But when we get people out of their cars and onto buses, that is what affects pollution. That reduces GHG. And so ridership, what we've learned throughout the years, what I've learned in 23 years in this crazy industry, is the best way to get ridership is through frequency. People like frequent service, and that costs more money. And so, I just believe firmly that we are not the polluters, and we affect pollution by getting people out of their cars, by putting the customer first, by making transit convenient and reliable with accurate real-time information. And yeah, I will stop talking now.
Okay. Kristen, do you want to ask a question or weigh in with some feedback?
Yeah, some questions. And first of all, this is really interesting. And I thank you to the operators for providing this level of nuance to the like conversion to zero emission vehicle transportation that I haven't heard before. And so I'm a director of planning at Alameda County Transportation Commission. We have a board of all the of city elected officials across Alameda County, the boards of supervisors, AC Transit, and BART. And so we also have a legislative platform, and we also have a county transportation plan. And so there's other ways we can communicate this. But a question about ARB, maybe several questions about ARB, like what is their governance structure? I don't think they're a board of elected officials. So what could even the legislature do? And if agencies don't meet the ruling in 2040, is there fees or like what's the consequence of not meeting it?
Really good questions. So technically, there isn't a stick yet built into the regulation. The stick does not exist. And the other part of it is the transit agencies, we're used to compliance. We have to comply with, federal regulations, state regulations, local regulations. It's in our DNA is to comply. So yeah, that is a possibility, but it's also important to remember. I mean, so in theory, we could just say no, right? And I don't know what the state would do. The state would have to react in some way, shape, and form. But remember, all of our boards are electeds, and our electeds also, many of them aspire to maybe other positions. They're loath to go against any regulation the state of California has and to be pointed out as such. So that provides right there a pretty strong limiting impact on our ability to just say no. Right? And so I think that's maybe an important way to put it. And you're not wrong. They are an appointed board. So they are not an elected board.
Yeah.
So what can our legislators do? Well, they could actually run a bill and they could roll back. They could roll back the ICT. So there is a way in which the legislators could impact it. They're not going to want to, though.
Ed, do you have a comment there?
Yes, the whole purpose of EBLC or any of the associated business environments, when we set up these task forces 40 and 30 and 20 years ago, was to be the front person to insist on logic, common sense, cost benefit analysis, and give courage to our legislatures. So the way we do that is this committee recommends to the board that we take 5 positions. We then get the business community behind it. We explain the math. Legislator, we do not want our workers to have less transit in exchange for 2 more buses. And you can't be tone deaf to the math. And we take the heat as the front position, and that has been our role the last 20 years. That's why we should be doing this.
Yep. I know Lindy and Shana, you both have policy backgrounds. if you don't want to make a comment, I know you represent organizations and you may be limited, but I respect you two as individuals and your professions, and I didn't know if you wanted to weigh in anything here. No obligation.
Come on, Lindy, I see you thinking.
I mean, I actually would defer to your incredible legal knowledge in regard to the best way to move forward any kind of legislative change. I just want to certainly express appreciation and echo what my colleague from ACTC said, which is that it's great to engage in these conversations. And I think there's certainly an interest in CCTA to try to figure out how to be supportive in the best way that we can be supportive, recognizing that these are state decisions. And I appreciate Bill's candor in saying that it's a difficult position that both local and state elected officials find themselves in and how to address this with their resources board. I think we have a very complex government structure in the state of California, and how those government structures overreach and not overreach, I'm sorry, overlap, can make it tough because you do have someone who might be on one board, but have an ambition for another, or be on many boards, right? We have folks who are on our board here at CCTA that are also on some of these boards. So that's not all that helpful. I think really I'm appreciating the opportunity to learn more than I have before. I appreciate some of these folks have shared with me and my learnings about like how challenging it is to meet this. And I know that I have heard in federal conversations I've been at this need to confront the lack of building of buses, right? That like, and I believe actually there's even been like a White House meeting on this. Am I correct about that, Bill? I mean, there is a federal acknowledgement that this is a problem. And I think for us to say like, well, let's just hope that gets fixed is not necessarily good policy making. At the same time, I think that I appreciate and think that it's true that EVLC is probably very well positioned to be out in the front of saying, like, we think that there could be a need for change here. And I appreciate Ed being willing to sort of lead that conversation and encourage EVLC to do so. So not all that helpful other than just to say that I appreciate the conversation.
Shana, anything before I let everybody do a closing remark? And again, no obligation.
Yeah, I think it's really helpful to have this conversation now because we are at the point in the legislative cycle where EVLC is about to adopt our legislative platform for the next year. So EVLC does have a pretty substantial legislative platform that we started doing last year. And so this is our opportunity to add to it, to revise it, to tweak, to reflect what we just heard. So I think the timing is fantastic. So Jared, I think we'll probably have some work to do on that. I think it's also great to hear how the operators have different views of this and where they align. I usually hear from one agency at a time and address their individual issues, but hearing you all talk together is really instructive. I think the context around where there are similarities and where there are differences sometimes gets lost when I don't hear it all together. So thanks for doing this. I think the last piece that I would add to this is the complexity around transportation funding. What everybody heard today is just the transportation funding complexity for like one itty bitty piece of the overall transportation funding mega problem, and the limited sources and the way that the state and federal governments have decided what are appropriate ways to fund public transportation and public transit are really outdated. Mm-hmm. And maybe in the long term, over the next, 14 years, say, we'll have some movement in that area. But if we don't attack it from a macro perspective to address transportation funding, we're going to keep having this conversation. And it's only going to get worse.
Okay, so the three of you, I know we could talk for another 2 hours on this, but since I promised to get everybody off around noon, who wants to go first with a closing statement or thought on this issue? Sal, why don't you dive in and then we'll do Bill and Christy, you could close us out. There you go.
Sure. Well, I'll make it pretty quick. So for full transparency on the regulation, what it does allows us to request an exemption, and there's certain criteria that we have to meet to request that. There isn't a lot of guidance on how to do that. And then for early adopters, we can utilize some of those options to not buy zero emission in a year or a year. So there's some off ramps, but the point I want to make with this is, as long as there's a mandate and the bus manufacturers know that, then they know we're going to have to try to buy first before we can't. And there was a time where public transit was an essential function, and I know AC Transit had vaccine shuttles, and we went out of our way to risking our lives literally to show up and take people to places. I think the state has forgotten that, and we need to remind the state that we're not a for-profit company. We're an essential function.
Yeah, Bill.
Well said, Sal. Yeah, there is an exemption to the rule. There are a number of agencies that have applied for it. I'm not aware of it actually being awarded. And so there you go. There's that piece. I just appreciate your inviting us to the conversation. The fact that we're talking to not just each other. And, it's one thing when we're preaching to the choir, but it's wonderful to have an opportunity to begin to really have real discussions about this issue with partners that are not in transit. And I think that is going to be imperative as we move forward to try to understand collectively, what does it mean to each of our approaches, our industries, our communities, and that sort of broad-based look at it, I think, is just so important. So Jared, I appreciate your reaching out to us and inviting us to the call.
Yeah. Thanks, Christy.
Yeah, nothing, no wise words of wisdom here. Just really do appreciate this opportunity. This is super tricky. I, for one, am not afraid of filing an exemption to CARB every year as long as I'm employed. And so, like I said, we just bought our 8 diesel hybrids. That action happened yesterday. We'll see what the years to come bring. But I really appreciate the support from this group and look forward to seeing how we can work together in the future.
Great. Thanks, everyone. And when Meg is back from her PTO, we will start working on a position paper sort of coming out of this, and maybe a way we can take it to some legislators and ARB just to at least raise perspective on this. So thank you again, everybody, for your time. I really appreciate everybody joining.